In order to help you with context, I had to return to Thomas Arst's essay in Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. Dr. Arst's essay continues as follows. My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak. I call you. Are you there? On November 12, 1913, Jung began his inner work on what would eventually become his Red Book. The dramatic passage occurs in the chapter titled Refinding the Soul. In a preliminary remark, Jung had noted that he had been able to attain honor, power, wealth, knowledge, and every human happiness, while distress in his inner and the outer worlds had overcome him with horror. Given his break with Sigmund Freud and the resulting state of questioning his previous understanding of the psyche, Jung's distress becomes understandable. Weighing heavily also was a series of remarkable dreams, visions, and waking fantasies that had left him bewildered to the point of suspecting an impending psychosis. Slowly, however, Jung began to realize that, for instance, his waking fantasies in October 1913, in which Europe was flood-ravaged, described in precognitive form events that were about to happen not uniquely to him, but to Europe collectively with the outbreak of World War I. Within this personal, highly disturbed state of mind, and within the catastrophic world situation, something else that had already bothered Jung, after putting the finishing touches on Wundlungen und Symbole der Libido, which was an English psychology of the unconscious, again became painfully evident to him, namely that a man who thinks he can live without myth or outside it is an exception. He is like one uprooted, having no true link either with the past or with the ancestral life which continues within him, or yet with contemporary human society. Then, stating his own personal dilemma, he continues, quote, I was driven to ask myself in all seriousness, what is the myth you are living? I found no answer to this question and had to admit that I was not living with a myth or even in a myth, but rather in an uncertain cloud of theoretical possibilities which I was beginning to regard with increasing distrust. I did not know that I was living a myth, and even if I had known it, I would not have known what sort of myth was ordering my life without my knowledge. So in the most natural way, I took it upon myself to get to know my myth, and I regarded this as the task of tasks. For, so I told myself, how could I, when treating my patients, make due allowance for the personal factor, for my personal equation, which is yet so necessary for the knowledge of the other person, if I was unconscious of it? I simply had to know what unconscious or preconscious myth was forming me, from what rhizome I sprang, unquote. And so, in November 1913, during an experiment of self-discovery, my most difficult experiment, Jung embarked on a search for his own myth. This search would lead him to a new spring of life, about which he would later write to Victor White. I wanted the proof of a living spirit, and I got it. Don't ask me at what price. Initially, Jung wrote down his fantasies and active imaginations in the so-called Black Books, which are regarded as a personal protocol of his self-experiment. From there, they found their way into a red, leather-bound folio volume for which he revised the material while also enhancing it with commentary and carefully drawn and meticulously arranged pictures. In Sonu Shamdasani's summary, the Red Book presents, quote, a series of active imaginations together with Jung's attempt to understand their significance. This work of understanding encompasses a number of interlinked threads, an attempt to understand himself and to integrate and develop the various components of his personality, an attempt to understand the structure of the human personality in general, an attempt to understand the relation of the individual to present-day society and to the community of the dead, an attempt to understand the psychological and historical effects of Christianity, and an attempt to grasp the future religious development of the West. Jung discovers many other themes in the work, including the nature of self-knowledge, the nature of the soul, the relations of thinking and feeling and the psychological types, the relation of inner and outer masculinity and femininity, the uniting of opposites, solitude, the value of scholarship and learning, the status of science, the significance of symbols and how they are to be understood, the meaning of the war, madness, divine madness, and psychiatry, how the imitation of Christ is to be understood today, the death of God, the historical significance of Nietzsche, and the relation of magic and reason. Unquote. Wolfgang Geigerich argues that the Red Book is to be read as Jung's answer to Nietzsche. Like many of his generation, Jung tried to confront the implications of modernity head-on. Here, by the way, one may be reminded of Heidegger's and Junger's disputation over the line, in which both, with respect to the question of nihilism, navigate in Nietzsche's wake. But Jung did not see his solution represented in Nietzsche's Übermensch, Superman. It was rather in the formulation of a new spirituality. The title of this solution is The Process of Individuation. The overall theme of the book is how Jung regains his soul and overcomes the contemporary malaise of spiritual alienation. This is ultimately achieved through enabling the rebirth of a new image of God in his soul and developing a new worldview in the form of a psychological and theological cosmology. Liber Novus presents the prototype of Jung's conception of the individuation process, which he held to be the universal form of individual psychological development. Liber Novus itself can be understood on one hand as depicting Jung's individuation process, and on the other hand, as his elaboration of this concept as a general psychological schema. Unquote. Along with Jung's narrative of individuation, many philosophical, theological, and psychological questions concerning topics such as God, knowledge, language, logic, meaning, chaos, death, and evil are raised in the Red Book. Several distinct themes and concepts circumscribe Jung's attempt at conceiving a new cosmology. Among others, these are finding the soul. At the beginning of his self-experiment, Jung is instructed by the spirit of the depths to turn away from the spirit of this time, which represents the scientific, materialistic worldview, and follow the spirit of the depths, which is the ruler of the depths of world affairs from time immemorial, and for all the futures possesses a greater power than the spirit of this time, who changes with generations. The soul should not be considered as an object of science, an object of a dead system or a dead formula, but rather as a living and self-existing being. The path of the soul is difficult and fraught with danger, for the signposts have fallen, unblazed trails lie before us. May each go his own way. Further, my friends, it is wise to nourish the soul. Otherwise, you will breed dragons and devils in your heart. The Red Book documents Jung's journey to the rediscovery of his lost soul, as well as his method of active imagination used to enter into dialogue with what he discovers. Dr. R's essay goes on, but I want to go back to the Red Book at this point.